You're listening to Monday Matters, a Principal Matters podcast production.
Hi, Principal Matters friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. Each week, we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own leadership. This is a Monday Matters episode, along with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke. And Jen, this is it. We're like end of April, and people are so busy. Everybody I talk to is like they have something on every single night from now till the end of school. So I bet you're busy.
Yes, and I do think about all of our principal friends, all the celebrations, all the events, prom. A lot of our principal friends are thinking about prom right now, graduation, all of that stuff. So yeah, it's a whirlwind right now. Before we know it, it's going to be June.
It is. Well, as we step into this week's conversation, I'm still celebrating my new book, Whose Permission Are You Waiting For? An Educator's Guide to Doing What You Love. And you have your copy.
I do. My listeners should know that when Will and I logged on today, I just held this up for him to see. It's just fun. It's fun. I went to the mailbox and there it was.
Well, I wanted to take a few minutes, since these sessions are shorter than our flagship show on Wednesday, to just talk a little bit about one of my favorite chapters. They're all my favorite chapters, but a chapter that I call Avoiding the Binary. And this is so cool, Jen, because I was looking at social media this morning, and Daniel Pink, who's just like one of my favorite authors, Daniel put a post up this morning sharing an idea from Stanford professors on something called the Odyssey Plan. And I was like, what? That's in my book. And so I quickly made a little comment on Daniel Pink's post that he'll probably never see because he's so famous. But I have a chapter toward the beginning of the book called Avoiding the Binary. And, back, we were both former language arts teachers, but I had the privilege when I was teaching ninth grade English to teach Homer's The Odyssey. And I love that story just because it's so crazy. All of the, intrigue and, dangers and monsters and all the pathways that he takes. And it takes him 20 years to get home. And, this idea of the Odyssey is a term that two authors from Stanford have borrowed to describe a process for decision making. And the professors are Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. They wrote a book called Designing Your Life, How to Build a Well-Lived, Joyful Life. And I wish I could remember, I came across their term in another book, so I bought their book because they were describing this idea of eliminating planning by only choosing two potential options, but giving yourself permission to plan 3 or 4 different options. I call these, options A, B, C, or D. And what I've discovered in decision making, that a lot of times leaders, and myself included, have had a tendency, there's something really hard in front of you. I'm going to make a list, pros and cons of A, pros and cons of B. But there's something that I started doing 5 or 6 years ago that I didn't realize was so helpful, but I started making a plan for, what would be a C option or what would be a D option? And if you could look at the walls of my office back then, I would actually have big Post-its with those options listed out on my walls with the pros and cons, the different people I might need to talk to within those options, other resources I might need to find so I could better understand those options, what were the benefits or the, so all of those things. And so in this chapter, Avoiding the Binary, I just invite leaders to think about what's the pathway you're on right now, whether it's a decision that you're making for school improvement or a decision you're making for your own career, and think about that with more than one option in front of you. So Jen, that's just a kind of a snapshot of what that chapter is. But what would you add to that when you think about, because you consistently make hard decisions. And so what are some things you would add to staying away from the binary?
Well, one of the things that you say in this chapter is building the options isn't just building the options. It's an attempt to find what potential open doors are available that you didn't even see. And so I think that's, when you talk about what your office may have looked like earlier when you were going through your options, you might not even know what doors are open. You might not have even thought that far. And I think just watching you make some of your professional transitions, the only potential for stoppage is yourself or your lack of belief in yourself. Not just you, Will. I'm talking to all
Mhm.
listeners there.
Yeah.
There's many times, and one of my biggest weaknesses as a leader is I stop things maybe before I look at those open doors. I'll say, well, that won't work. Or, we're not going to change things just to change things. But really, that's fear talking. That's me feeling like I can't visualize what it might look like and
Mm.
not even letting myself see the open doors. And so it's not just binary. It's, how many different versions of this choose your adventure might be out there. And like you said, this can be about making decisions for your school. It could be about your own career trajectory. It could be how to respond to a big problem in your school, but you're looking for those open doors through your options.
Yeah. So let me give an example of three options if you're considering a pathway in front of you. So and sometimes when I'm on the other side of someone who's trying to think things through, I'll ask them, okay, option A, what's the current trajectory that you're on and the most logical next step on that current path? Option B, what's another possible pathway or transition that you could make that's sensible, but would bring you satisfaction or the achievement that you're looking for, but it's not the current one you're on. It would take a different pathway to get there. But then option C, and this is my most fun, what's a third option you might pursue if fear or failure of loss were removed from the equation? Boy, you talk about expanding your brain
Right.
because then you're giving yourself permission to really get imaginative.
Right. And that might be where you need some input from others. Many times where that binary is so incredibly entrenched in the way we think that we can't get out of it. And so I love to ask my team or my friends or my family, what am I not seeing? Like let's think crazy. Let's think wide and broad. Let's ask questions of other districts. Let's call our networks and let's do some internet searches and see what might be out there, to make sure that you're not just walking around the world with your blinders on.
Yeah. Well, one of the other steps involved in that Odyssey plan, and I may not cover this as much in detail in my book is Evans and Burnett do in theirs, but they talk about that once you've begun to explore, which is why they call it an Odyssey plan, you're giving yourself permission to explore these pathways. Then, like you said, you can start making a list of, well, maybe I could talk to this person because they
Right.
understand this better than I do. Or maybe I could pick up the phone, or maybe I can invite someone to coffee and just kind of ask the questions I really want to know about this. And so they just really encourage people to become curious and become like in a way, a student of those pathways. When it's come to my own career choices, Jen, this has been helpful for me because I can look at maybe an offer that's in front of me as a potential option, but I can also create for myself more than one potential pathway. And within those potential pathways, I usually realize that there's something more I need to know before I can go down that pathway. Or by imagining going down that pathway, then I begin to realize something that I need to learn, or maybe it's a new skill I need to take on. Maybe it's another degree that I need to have. Maybe it's another relationship that I need to form before this can happen. A good friend of ours, Nick Davies, he's an assistant principal in Washington State. And a couple of years ago, we were talking, and he was just curious to learn more about leadership. He just finished his doctoral dissertation, and he was like, well, I've got this time that I've carved into my week that I'm not going to be going to school anymore, but how could I use it productively? And he was already doing this when he reached out to me. And I just encouraged him, you're doing it right now. You're reaching out to other leaders and saying, what are some things that maybe I could learn that I didn't know? And so he ended up in 1 year interviewing like 50 different leaders just to ask them questions about what have you learned that could help me in my next journey too. So he was Odyssey planning. He was out there cultivating those relationships in ways that could help him grow as he moved forward.
Did he put that into a book or something? Or did he
He
put that
turned it
together
he
into
turned it
something?
into a presentation. So he's
Okay.
present. Yeah.
I'm also thinking how valuable that would be for some sort of a Substack or some sort of a
Mhm.
publication for people, 50 things I've learned along the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Well, Nick actually did present that finding at one of the national principals conferences, and he still kept it up. So every week he's putting out something where he's talking to leaders
Nice.
and sharing what he's learning from them. Well, Jen, as we wrap up this conversation, I just want to remind our listeners that they can find their own copy of Whose Permission Are You Waiting For at my website at williamdparker.com/books if they want to check that out. And as we're looking at summer, I know that, well, we're looking at spring going into summer. I know you're getting ready for ASCD's leadership conference. And then both of us will be out in Seattle in July.
Right.
So why don't you tell listeners what they can expect?
Right. So well, both of these conferences are going to be really incredible. ASCD is combining for the first time with ISTE, and it's going to be massive. The conferences are separate, but they're being run at the same site. And so it is going to allow attendees a chance to kind of dabble in areas that they weren't sure they were allowed to dabble in before. And that's super exciting. And then in Seattle, it'll be all of our NASSP and NAESP friends all together. It's so exciting. I can't wait.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you're going to be at either one of those conferences, and ASCD ISTE, is that in Austin?
That's in San Antonio this year.
It's in San Antonio. Thank you for
Yeah.
correcting me. So if you're going to be in San Antonio for ASCD ISTE's conference, or if you're going to be out in Seattle for the national conference with NASSP or NAESP, then let Jen or me know, because man, we'd love to just say hello, take a quick photo with you, maybe sit down for coffee, whatever it takes, but we'd love to learn from other leaders. So thank you, Jen, for the time today that you've given to Principal Matters listeners and Principal Matters listeners as you step into this week. Thank you for doing what matters, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Monday Matters.